Hello everybody, this is lesson 10 of the lecture Macroeconomics. I will discuss the slides 43 to 57 of chapter 3, the neoclassical model. So far we have developed the so-called production module of the neoclassical model, which explains the determinants of the supply of goods. The next step is now to derive the other side of the economy, the so-called demand module, which explains the determinants of the demand for goods. Demand for goods depends critically on the household decision to make savings. Households decide how much of their income, which is equal to GDP under the current assumptions, they use for consumption goods and how much of their income they use for savings. Savings are offered to firms as credits on the capital market, as we have already seen. The neoclassics assume now that the decision how much is consumed and how much is saved depends on the level of the interest rate. The neoclassics assume that credit supply by households grows when the interest rate gets larger. For example, if the interest rate grows from this level to this level, then savings will grow from this level to this level. So a higher interest rate causes households to reduce consumption today in favor of consumption tomorrow, when the savings are paid back. Hence, households compensate the loss of utility from less consumption today by the increase of utility from more consumption tomorrow. Since the part of income which is not saved must be used for consumption, we can derive consumption demand from savings supply. The household budget equals household income on one side of the equation, and on the other side of the equation the sum of consumption plus savings. So, in other words, consumption plus savings always equal household income. This is the household budget constraint. We use the following shortcuts, as already mentioned. For household consumption we use capital letter C, for household savings we use capital letter S, and household income is equal to GDP, hence we use the shortcut Y, capital letter Y. If we subtract from the left side of the equation savings, it appears on the right side of the equation with a negative sign. Now we can determine how consumption must react if the interest rate changes. For example, if the interest rate gets larger, such that savings gets larger, because we have assumed a positive impact of the interest rate on savings, then the difference between income, GDP, and savings must get smaller. In other words, consumption must get smaller. So if the interest rate goes up, consumption gets smaller. Hence, consumption has now the interest rate as a negative argument, just the opposite way as savings. If the interest rate grows, savings grow, so that consumption decreases and vice versa. As a result, consumption depends negatively on the interest rate, while savings depend positively on the interest rate. So if you transfer these considerations on the market diagram with the interest rate on the y-axis and the consumption level on the x-axis, we obtain the consumption curve with a negative slope. This means that if the interest rate is relatively high, for example this level, then consumption is relatively low, this level. And if the interest rate falls to this level, then consumption gets higher, up to this level. So the lower the interest rate, the less income is saved. The less income is saved, the more income is used for consumption. Since the income of households must either be spent for consumption or used to make savings, an increase of household income must increase consumption and or savings, while a decrease of household income must decrease consumption and or savings. So if we write down again the household budget, consumption plus savings is equal to household income, then it's obvious that an increase of household income or an increase of GDP must lead to an increase of savings and or an increase of consumption, while a decrease of household income or GDP must lead to a decrease of savings and or a decrease of consumption. As a result, income affects consumption and savings positively. So, income has a positive sign in the consumption function and a positive sign in the savings function, while interest has a positive sign on the savings function and a negative sign on the consumption function. The following diagrams show the graphical implications of this relationship. So, we transfer these considerations again to a market diagram where on the y-axis we measure the interest rate and on the x-axis we measure consumption. In such a diagram we have to shift the consumption function to the right or upward if income grows. So household income is a positive shift parameter of consumption demand. An increase of household income increases consumption. If income falls, then we have to shift the consumption curve to the left. Hence, a decrease of household income shifts the consumption function to the left. By the same logic, if we transfer these considerations to the capital market diagram with the interest rate on the y-axis and savings or credit demand on the x-axis, we have to shift the savings curve to the right if income grows. In this case, households supply more savings for every level of the interest rate. Hence, income is a positive argument or shift parameter of the savings function in this diagram. If income falls, then we have to shift the savings function to the left. So, since household income is a positive shift parameter of credit supply, a decrease of household income decreases credit supply. As these considerations show, household income influences household consumption demand and savings supply. Since under the assumptions of the neoclassical model, household income is determined by the current capital stock and the equilibrium labor input, which is determined on the labor market, it is typically constant within a period. Therefore, we will neglect the impact of household income on consumption, demand and savings supply in the exposition of the following graphs. There is, however, one important exception in chapter 3.2.2 when we discuss the case of tax-financed government consumption. We must record the effect of household income on household savings, since an increase of taxes decreases disposable income of households, such that we have to shift the savings function to the left. Since savings supply is equal to credit supply, we now know the supply side on the market for credits. The next step is to derive the demand for credits. The neoclassics assume that firms demand credits while household sector supplies credits. This is actually the case in most real-world economies. The aggregate household net savings is positive in most countries. Hence, even though some households are certainly debtors, the average household is typically a net saver. The neoclassics assume furthermore that firms decide how many investment goods they buy depending on the real interest rate. The neoclassics assume that a lower interest rate causes firms to invest more, because a lower interest rate reduces the costs of financing investment goods, and hence demand for investment goods grows. This means that if the interest rate is relatively high, like this one, investment credit demand is relatively low on this level, for example. And if the interest rate falls now from this level to this level, then investment credit demand grows from this level to this level. Due to the complementarity of capital and labor, an increase in labor input from L1 to L2 increases the productivity of investment goods such that the investment credit demand grows. Therefore, we have to shift the credit demand curve upward if labor input grows. So, labor input is a positive shift parameter of the credit demand curve. We can attach a positive sign below the labor input argument in the investment credit function. Given all these assumptions, we are now able to determine the equilibrium interest rate of the capital market. Here we add the credit demand curve to the capital market. This is the credit supply curve, household savings. The equilibrium interest rate balances credit supply of households with credit demand of firms. Therefore, given the equilibrium interest rate, savings at this interest rate is equal to credit demand, investment credit demand at this interest rate level. Shift parameters on the capital market are, as we have seen, household income, positive shift parameter of credit supply from households, and labor input, positive shift parameter of credit demand by firms. Okay, so much for this lesson. In the next lesson, we will complete the demand module and develop the final version of the neoclassical model.